Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Career Club talk. It's Startup Life in the Post-COVID Era, and our special guest is Ahmed Reza. He's an AI geek and a serial entrepreneur with a childhood background in the performing arts, but he's also worked with some amazing companies such as NASA, and he's currently, his current startup is Yib.io Incorporated, which applies artificial intelligence to voice and SMS data to address business problems such as task automation, marketing attribution, sales training, and customer and employee relationship management. So without further ado, I'll let Ahmed take over.
All right. Hi, thanks, Linda. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Hello, everybody. My name is Ahmed. I am serial entrepreneur, and I'm honored to be here and speak with all of you. I'm going to share my screen because I have a little bit of a presentation prepared. Let me know if you can see my screen. Linda, do you see it?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, awesome. All right, so my talk today is about startup life in the post-COVID era. Obviously, COVID has been this crazy thing, and being an immigrant and actually being in the middle of a somewhat bloody revolution in Bangladesh when I was growing up, I thought that was pretty crazy. But this is definitely a different level of crazy. Now, a lot of people that I talk to, they're talking about, how do you survive during this? And they get really surprised when I say, something like this is something like COVID is when you should be actually thriving. You could be thriving. Of course, if you're afflicted with the disease itself, or your close family and friends have it, that definitely you can't be thriving through that. But just from the startup perspective, it's not the end of the world. A little bit more about myself. I'm founder and CEO of Yobi. So it's YIB.io. YIB stands for Yobi Byte. So we've now shortened it down to Yobi. I also have a nonprofit called Trap Hub, which helps geeks launch businesses, nonprofits, or anything else that makes the world a better place. So the really interesting thing about COVID is that it was a black swan event. Those of you who've heard of the term black swan, and being an AI geek, it's especially interesting because with AI, you're training a machine learning algorithm to learn things over and over and over, and the AI is especially susceptible to black swan events. So if it's always seen swans that are white, if you ever see a black swan, it doesn't know what to do. It's a very low probability event. When you're making plans, people are making plans for weddings, people are making plans for startups, all sorts of other things. And of course, it's been really highly disruptive. What's interesting though, is if you're in the startup world, these things sort of should be second nature to you, or at least you should account for crazy things to happen, because startups are like a roller coaster, and you don't know what's coming around the corner. So you actually do take into account, changes in the marketplace. And for a startup, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's probably a good thing. And that's the case that I'm going to make here. Especially that third part, highly disruptive, right? You talk about disrupting industries. Disruption by its nature is not necessarily a good thing, but it results in good things. It results in better systems, better, more resilient people, economics, country. So, sorry, lost my mouse there. So one of the really interesting things, if you're in tech, of course, I'm going to be heavily biased towards tech. We're in Silicon Valley. I'm in tech myself. If you had a startup doing non-tech things that, this might not be a great thing for you, but the acceleration and the adoption of technology, as witnessed by the fact that we are all on a Zoom call and not in a room together at Stanford. People have just rapidly switched over, and even though a lot of these technologies have existed for a really long time. So Zoom existed for a long time. And at one point I wanted to try to build something very Zoom-like. I remember someone going, oh, that's, they built it, but nobody's ever going to use it. Nobody uses this thing. Video conferencing is weird. And I agree, there's a little bit of uncanny valley to it, but people have adopted it. What's been really interesting to see is in places like healthcare, you're seeing adoption of video technology, relaxation of some of the HIPAA rules, and a lot of my family members, they're in healthcare, and by the time I got to them to ask them about, hey, what's necessary, like, do you have video conferencing tools? They were done. They were like, no, we already adopted it. It's already there. We're already working using this in the ICU. So technology adoption also means if you are a provider of technology, that's a boon for you. And we've kind of seen this in the stock market too. A lot of people are like, why is the stock market acting the way it is? Well, that's because this event has unfairly, or this event has tilted the world, I would say, more in the favor of technologists. And of course, if you're a larger corporation with a lot of money and you can ride out the economic crisis, tilted the world in your favor too. So some of the technologies that we've adopted, Zoom, like we're on the Zoom call right now, Instacart. I don't know how many other people do this, but I've cut down my grocery store visits to like once a month. And I used Instacart before, but not as much as I do now, like many other people. So if I have to deliver groceries to my mom, I'll use Instacart and they'll take it right to her door. It's less than ideal, but again, considering how long Instacart had been around, and if you remember back to 1999, I'm dating myself here. Some of you may have been born after that. But back in 1999, there was this company called Webvan, which was supposed to like revolutionize the grocery business because they were going to deliver groceries. And they led the dot-com bust. And then Instacart came around. People were like, oh, that'll never work. And the growth was anemic. But after COVID, everybody's like, let's give it a try. And after you give it a try, after you try it for a little while, now I don't really plan a grocery stop on the way home or anything like that. I just go, oh, groceries, no big deal. I'll just Instacart it. E-commerce. E-commerce has been a big winner. So obviously, Amazon's valuation went through the roof. I think they've tripled in value. Jeff Bezos is the richest man on earth. And it's not just Amazon, it's other e-commerce type things. So I think Etsy and all these other folks, they've started seeing a surge in demand. And of course, communications. And this is another shameless plug of my company, Yovi. That's our app. But we've seen this crazy, crazy demand. We're in the early stages, and we had really large entities come up and request to use the app. And I was like, oh, let me get some more engineers on it and build it faster. Just practically overnight, Unified Communications as a Service, which is that term down there, yeah, UCaaS, the demand increased immediately by 86%. And Unified Communications is when a business is trying to talk to their customers over Facebook, Twitter, text messages, phone calls, just like see everything in one place so they can manage that customer relationship better. And you're seeing a proliferation of these kinds of technologies. So obviously it's a really good time to be in communications because you don't really have to make your case so much for why advanced communication technologies are needed. So, of course, there is the economic crisis, and I can't downplay how big and how scary this thing was. So I'll give you guys a little bit of my own experience. So besides my startup, I have ownership interest in a few companies that are much more traditional. And within 1 week, these are older companies. One of the companies has at least been around for more than 30 years. Within 1 week, their revenues went down by 86%. And I'll tell you what, no matter how good things are for your company, those are scary numbers. Those are the kind of numbers that kill and destroy organizations, destroy value. So when you shut down the US economy, obviously you're going to have a pretty ridiculous economic crisis. And I remember at the time advising the executives of the company and wondering like how they're going to make it through. And they decided to basically lay everybody off. They got on a Zoom call. I was on the Zoom call, and it was probably one of the hardest calls I've ever had to be on. It would have been hard in person over Zoom, and just like, added salt to the wound. And they had to lay everybody off, because if they didn't lay everybody off, there was just no way that they could continue paying with this uncertainty that their revenues were going to go away. And that those businesses would have shuttered. And then whenever the virus was finished going through its course, those businesses wouldn't come back. So that was actually a prudent decision. And all the employees actually agreed. They realized that, look, right now they could get unemployment or something. And at the time that this decision was made, unemployment, they didn't add the additional unemployment benefits. So it was just going to be like a lot of these factory workers were going to get like $1,500, $1,600 a month. But they understood that if everything shut down and the revenues completely went away, $1,500 is better than zero. And whenever the shutdown ended, they would come back. I'm happy to report, while it was a really difficult decision at the time, a couple of weeks later, so we're kind of early in making that decision. A couple of weeks later, when the crisis hit, the unemployment lines were really, really long. All of these folks were really happy that they'd applied. And when the government put in the additional stimulus, which I personally think actually helped tremendously, I think we would have been in a depression if that stimulus had not passed. And thanks to the stimulus, everybody was actually, the folks that got laid off did okay. Some of them even made a little bit more money than they made before. And after the reopening, so this was a couple of months ago, the factory reopened a couple of months ago. A good chunk of those people were back to work. So in between though, there were some pretty amazing things that happened. I realized that we saw the best of the folks that were there. So even though everyone was getting laid off, the senior leadership of the companies, they said, well, we understand what's going on. We want to see how we can help, because if there was ever a time to try to help save a business, if there's ever a time to help each other, now it's it. And quite frankly, I was deeply touched by that. And a lot of business books talk about it, but just seeing it firsthand, seeing just wonderful people step up and not just brainstorm, come up with new solutions, keep an eye on the market. And they're amazing people because they were looking at opportunities, like what are the market opportunities that might come up that would allow these businesses to reopen. And one of the businesses were actually able to produce a new product that took advantage of the economic uncertainty and the closing and everything. And one of the companies were able to actually still bring in money during the shutdown with the skeleton crew. So yes, it's an economic crisis, but for a startup, that's not the worst thing in the world. And knock on wood, but at least it didn't turn out as badly as it could have. And recessions, to be quite honest, are a great time to start a business for many reasons. I got my start during the 2008, the housing recession, the Great Recession. I remember feeling the sense of duty almost. I said, hey, I can probably build a business that can employ people, that can create opportunities, tap into untapped things. And it actually worked out pretty well for me. Um, During a recession, the competition, I feel like it's a little bit less, especially for things like hiring. Actually, definitely for things like hiring. I was in Melbourne, Florida at the time that I started my first company, or not my first company, but my first real like full-time company after quitting my engineering career. And I was able to hire people, like really high quality people, for like a reasonable amount, something that I could bootstrap. I bootstrapped my first business. I bootstrapped actually my first few businesses. And thanks to the recession, there were plenty of people that I could hire. And recession also presents other opportunities. During the during the housing crisis recession, there were a lot of people looking to save money. There were like all sorts of weird products that wouldn't have sold at other times. I remember seeing like this toothpaste squeezer that'll get you the most out of your tube of toothpaste. And people were really in this mood of, of being ultra savers. I don't know if anybody remembers hypermilers. It was these guys that owned Toyota Priuses, and they would drive it so they'd get like 100 miles per gallon or something. So everybody was in this mindset of saving and not being wasteful. And that created opportunities for new businesses to serve those needs. The other big thing about economic crises is changing markets. So I just described one of the changing markets, which is like communications. So my company, which is a startup in the truest sense, just a bunch of guys at EOB that are building this thing out, that wouldn't have had as much of an advantage if the incumbents were just so huge that like we just couldn't do anything about it. So let's say a year ago, you wouldn't think of challenging AT&T or Verizon. Those guys are huge, right? And not just huge. They had the market on lockdown. Like they knew exactly what people wanted. They wanted cell phones, and that was it. But now look at what happened with Zoom. Entirely new market winner, who wouldn't have necessarily won in the era pre-COVID. So economic crises also lend a hand sometimes to create new winners to basically enable startups who are fast and agile, or startups who may have been well positioned already, like Zoom, to just come in and take the market because the market just suddenly comes to be. Some of the other things that have been interesting is remote work. Now, remote work is something that I've done for a long time. Since the very beginning, I hired some folks overseas. I had some experience with it. Remote is really difficult, especially if you're a startup. But more than likely, if you're a Silicon Valley startup, you probably have people who are remote because it's expensive to hire people here. So when I was in Florida, I hired a team in the Philippines. I had some folks in India, and right now I do have folks all around the world. And so I knew how remote worked. Remote isn't something new to me, and to many startups, it's not a new thing. But remote, for my bigger competitor who has a giant office spaces, leases for years to come, for them, remote has been a rude awakening, right? They have to shift everything around. So I personally feel like we took advantage of remote because we were already remote, not much changed. Just continued working. Maybe we had like a week lag because of COVID, but if you're a much bigger company that was not used to remote, that hurt. The other really interesting thing specifically about this crisis is that the VCs are opening up beyond physical proximity. I would regularly hear things like, there's VCs, if they can't drive within 15 minutes to your startup, right? If you weren't in Palo Alto proper, right, next to the right coffee shop, it would be harder for you to raise money. Thanks to Zoom now being the standard, meeting place, VCs are willing to talk to Zoom with anybody who's awake at the same time that they're awake. So if you're in Kansas, you want to pitch to a VC, yeah, it's not that different from the guy that's 20 minutes down the road. Of course, if you happen to be in Palo Alto and you're paying Palo Alto rents or you're paying Silicon Valley rents, you lost that advantage of physical proximity. But I think overall, this isn't a bad thing. I know a lot of people that have moved to lower cost areas or moved closer to family during this time. So yes, economic crisis, but there are a lot of opportunities, and in a startup, that's what you're all about. You're about taking advantage of those opportunities. And there's some positive news, like I hope. It has been a really, really long, I thought at first it was going to be a month, maybe 2 months. Now we're going into 2021 here. It's right around the corner, but I feel like we're turning a corner, hopefully, finally. And that's what I try to keep remembering myself, is that this too shall pass, right? Yes, it's a difficult time right now, but we're human beings. We are very adaptable. And we'll get through this. We'll learn lessons, and this crisis will also pass. And there will be other crises in the future, but this will pass. People's behaviors have changed, and that's actually that's a positive. People are a lot more cognizant of washing their hands, whether they're coughing, health and all that. Other really interesting things that I'm looking forward to, again, I'm biased because I'm a technologist, is people are okay now with Zooming. People are okay with virtual connections. People have had time to really sit and think about things that are important now that they're not, a lot of them are not sitting in cars just commuting. I think I have been in more Zoom birthday parties for nieces, nephews that are in different parts of the country, one time different parts of the world, than I normally am. Because normally, if you're not in the same place, they're like, oh, I don't have to invite this person. You feel kind of disconnected with families, friends, they're reconnecting. And because Zoom is no longer like weird, people are coming together and they're using technology more. So businesses like Instacart, Zoom, they may have been scared if COVID just happened for 2 weeks or 4 weeks, but it's been months, and Zoom has become the norm. And even after this pandemic, even after this thing passes, a lot of those behaviors are unlikely to go away. So that's something that you can actually bank on. So if you're building an application, if you're building a startup, if you're building a business, those are somewhat predictable, unless another black swan happens. And 3, we are not in a depression, which is wonderful news, and hopefully it keeps going that way. The stock market is definitely doing better, but and of course there are people that have been hurt a lot by this, but seriously, it could have been a lot worse. I personally was predicting a much more dire economic crisis, but it looks like if people kind of are as resilient in the future as they have been so far, there's going to be a bit of a recession, but we'll climb out of it. And again, those are all good things for a startup, for a small business. Well, not small business necessarily, but good for a startup. Incumbents have been shaken up, and that's wonderful, because normally, the big guys might sometimes stifle innovation. Now, this might be a little bit of the controversial part of my talk, but as some of you may or may not have noticed, there may be a few big dominant companies around here that maybe stifled innovation a little bit. And when you're seriously thinking about exiting to one of these big cos as the startup strategy, that's not necessarily a net benefit. So I think for me personally, it was great to hear that Google and Facebook and Amazon, they were being a little bit more conservative about hiring. And I was actually able to hire some great engineers finally for Yobi because I wasn't competing with these guys that have very, very deep pockets, much deeper pockets than I do. So the incumbents being shaken up, to me, is a really good thing. People have had time to think and want to have impact. That's another really big positive thing that I've personally gained from. So now that everybody's home, they have a little bit of time to think. A lot of engineers, a lot of creatives might go, hey, I've worked at Facebook long enough, and sure, I'm okay with taking a lower salary, or I'm okay with doing something that has a little bit more impact. So whether you're a nonprofit, so in my nonprofit Trump Up, I've seen a lot of activity from folks that I normally wouldn't have seen, mainly because they had more free time to volunteer or to help out, and others who just did some soul searching because of everything they saw going around and decided this was the time to step up and take that step that they may have only dreamed about before, which might mean, hey, I want to go work for a startup that's building something big because of the impact, because of my legacy or whatever, and not just on being coin operated. So that's been pretty refreshing personally. The sixth one, I put a question mark because lower Bay Area rents. Like, I don't know if that's like a huge net positive. I haven't seen the rents get too crazy low, but still, the rents not just keeping going up is a good thing, I guess. So maybe this will help us reshuffle and readjust just a little bit, give some breathing room. So the other thing that I wanted to highlight during this post-COVID era is harnessing your inner, oh, I spelled gorilla wrong. I'm sorry. I'm channeling my inner gorilla spirit by spelling gorilla wrong. But I remember this movie where these guys were talking about how a gorilla army is almost unstoppable because they're small, they're nimble, they keep getting stronger, and they're really hard to take on for a well-organized military force. And this is the time to harness your inner gorilla spirit, right? Be anti-fragile. Another one of Nassim Taleb's books, I'll give a quick 2-minute definition of anti-fragility. He basically says there are systems that are fragile, and then there are systems that are resilient, and then there are systems that are anti-fragile. One example would be our immune system. So when our immune system gets attacked, it comes back stronger. So it's one of those systems that every time you attack it, every time you break it down, like our muscles, if you work out, that actually decimates your muscles, but it comes back stronger and you have bigger muscles and you become stronger. So in a startup, like bigger companies are generally more fragile. They really bank on the future being predictable. In a startup, you're small, you're more like a gorilla, right? And your advantage is when there's chaos, you can just switch your strategy, you can switch your tactics. Guerrilla armies don't tend to have really crazy hierarchies. Everybody's like on their own, they're working together collaboratively. They figure out what their communication's supposed to be like just on the fly. So this is a good time to use that inner spirit and be more anti-fragile. Look at these things that could break others as something to learn from and to grow stronger from. And that's really important, is to grow stronger, right? Use the mist, use the cover to come out with your product, switch, pivot, or whatever you have to do. And the agility over structure and hierarchy. Now that everybody's working from home, right? Getting people together and getting that sense of camaraderie and shared goal, shared purpose. We're all kind of miserable together, right? We all feel what it's like to feel this anxiety in the back. So, using that to eliminate some of the hierarchy and actually, just bring everybody in on the solution, much like a guerrilla army would do, I highly recommend that. I do that myself at our startup and in other organizations that I'm a part of. I see that working very, very well. Sorry. All right. So another common theme that I've heard is, but aren't the VCs scared? Like, this is crazy, all this crazy economic uncertainty. And you must have heard that funding has dried up. I remember at the very beginning of the crisis, talking to someone who's saying, man, this is going to be worse than the dot-com boom. Like, if the best time to raise money was last year. Yes, VCs are appropriately scared or appropriately concerned. But the truth of the matter is, if you've been watching the news or if you've just been following, there is still a lot of investment that's going on. And like I said, people are investing in companies outside of Silicon Valley, inside of Silicon Valley, because VCs who've been there, done that, they kind of see some of this stuff too. They see that it's during these fluctuations in the economy, in the country, and people's behaviors that's also the beginnings of huge opportunities. So if you look at some of the unicorns of today, like Airbnb, Dropbox, they were all started during the last recession, and they basically were scrappy startups, and the VCs that invested in those, they made out like bandits. And I'm sure a lot of the hardened VCs, they see that today as well, is that there's a lot of opportunity out there. There's a lot of companies. And another good thing is crazy economic times like this make a lot of the fair weather startups or fair weather founders like drop off. People who see being a founder as romanticized or something. Like, I will not BS you, being a founder sucks, especially in times like this, right? You're going to have to, tighten your belt a lot more. You're going to have to be, the markets, people are just less forgiving. The markets are less forgiving. You have to get things right. So on the plus side, that means less competition. So if you're building something and you're really dedicated, this is a good thing for you. And another really interesting thing that I see is there are large funds that are closing, or funding rounds that are closing, that you'll see that this company called Gong just raised $200 million. Podium raised like $100 and something million. Dialpad, which is another communication company, they raised $100 million plus. Twilio's valuation is through the roof. So there is still a lot of VC activity happening. Yes, there was a little bit of tightening for a little while, but again, if you're in the venture game, this is what you look for. You look for opportunities, and there are a lot of them. There are going to be many billion-dollar companies or multi-billion-dollar companies that are going to be created during this time. Now, I know I've talked a lot about a lot of things, but I just want to leave you with some of these thoughts. So these are things that I've learned myself during this crisis. It's been a learning experience and a growth experience, and it's been surreal. And it's part of the reason why I like being in a startup. I love being in a startup because you're always learning and you're always forced to grow. So the first one is take care of people. Like I mentioned, it was really difficult to be in conversations where people are getting laid off, but it was amazing to see people taking care of each other. Just human decency, right? There's a saying, I was like, oh, it's not personal, it's business. Well, business is about people. A company is a company of people. So during a crisis like this, that's when you can really tell what people are made of. And companies come and go, but people will remember. And being a good person, being good with people, pay off in the long run. I've learned that. And taking care of people, being honest with people, even through difficult times, being transparent and saying, hey, we're in bad shape. It's crazy what you see. You see people coming to take care of you as well, and vice versa. And at the end of the day, all you really have is your tribe, and it's those people around you, whether it's in a company or their extended families and whatnot. That's really what matters. So take care of the people, think about them first and foremost, of your team, or if you're part of a team, and everything else will be fine. The second thing that I've taken away, like growing on the inside. What I mean by that is startups are all about growth. I know, like, startups are about like hyperbolic growth, crazy growth. The truth of the matter is, you can't have a company that's just growing on the outside, and if you as a founder and all the people who are part of the company, they don't grow as well. So this crisis gave us the ability to actually do some internal growing. So remember, I talked about some of the executives who basically unpaid showed up and said, how can I help? What can I do? I personally reached out to them and I gave them advice, and advice that I've given myself, books that I've read myself. I told them this is going to be tough, and if you want to learn about some entrepreneurial methods of thinking of how to build products, right? I remember one manager who had never built any products, had never thought about it that way. Ended up reading a couple of books, coming up with a product idea that made money, that helped the company significantly. So growing on the inside, whether it's through books, whether it's through mental health, physical health, whatever it is. So I'm very thankful that I got to take some time to do some growing myself. And if it's even about just thinking, writing, journaling, improving some habits, improving coping mechanisms. Oh dear God, I can't emphasize how much improving coping mechanisms is important. But this is a good time to grow. Because yes, it will pass, things will become crazy and busy again. But when it's not, when you're at home, when you have that time and space to think, invest in yourself, invest in yourselves, not just as a founder, but also employees as well. Third one, this is kind of in the middle, but this is really important. Leadership is more valuable today than ever. There are people who, most people actually trust systems, trust governments, and a lot of these things have eroded. And if you have already been part of a startup, if you have been in a leadership position, improve your leadership skills. Think about what it means to be a leader, and lead on solutions, whether it's in your startup, whether it's in your community, whether it's in your family. This is a good time to take those skills and put them to use. Mental health. Speaking of mental health, I've thought about it often that, when you're working on a company, when you're building a company, it's mentally distressing. It's mentally, there's a lot of mental pressure. But there is a stigma about talking about mental health. There's a stigma about talking about depression, anxiety. And truth of the matter is everybody has it. And what ended up happening with COVID is like that came to the forefront. And everybody initially acted like, oh, there's nothing, I'm fine, I'm bulletproof, there's nothing wrong with me. And you realize, no, that's not true. We're all going through this anxiety. We're all going through, this fear of death all around us. So as a startup, you're always looking for opportunities. And one of the opportunities that I see as a strategic advantage is to have mental strength and know how to deal with it. So one of the things that we did was we got some executive coaches, counselors, and we offered it to everybody and said, if you do it, like you're incentivized to make use of these resources and come out stronger and better. And I'm happy to report that's actually worked really well. So I have some executives who are a lot more resilient mentally than they were in the very beginning, because at least one of them was always like, oh, everything's fine, and when in reality, that was taking a very serious toll on that person. So mental health is a strategic advantage because everybody is stressed out and anxious. If you can be calm during this time, and if you can make good, calm decisions, your team can make good, calm, straightforward decisions and see through the fog, you're going to do better. And number 5, take on the challenges. Just meet them head on, because there's so many challenges, and challenges suck, but challenges also make you who you are. And you being better at meeting challenges and making the most out of it, making lemonade out of lemons, is why you're in a startup to begin with, right? So there's plenty of challenges out there. Don't be shy. Take it on. Of course, take my advice with a grain of salt. And that's it. It only took 41 minutes of me talking.
So,
Thank you for being so patient.
Ahmed, we have some questions that were submitted by our attendees when they registered.
Mm-hmm.
So the first question is, should you give up an idea that is not solving a COVID need?
Should you give up an idea that's not solving a COVID need? No, absolutely not. You should rethink your idea, given that COVID's happened and it's gonna change certain dynamics. But yeah, COVID isn't a permanent thing, right? It might be long, but it's definitely not permanent. So I would recommend against giving up your idea just because it's not, solving the immediate problem. So you want to think a little bit longer term than that.
And then the other question is, are there particular industries and/or segments where funding opportunities are still generally available?
Yeah, there's quite a few. Now, if you just follow the line, like you see where the trends are. So communication obviously is one. There's like more biotech companies are getting funded, obviously, and there's a whole bunch of companies that you'll notice that are getting funding right now. And they're on the same trajectory. People are seeing, okay, we've got COVID, this is what we're gonna need, right? We're starting to realize our infrastructure maybe wasn't as good as we thought it was. So there's gonna be plenty of opportunities coming up in the next decade. There's probably gonna be a lot of government spending coming up. So tons of opportunities. So if you're going into a startup, if you're thinking about an idea, think about things that that make sense in 5-10 years.
The next question that somebody submitted was, when do you know to quit what you're currently doing and go work on a venture? Maybe a new venture.
Oh boy, that's a really loaded question. Because when do you know to quit what you're currently doing? Honestly, that's something that you really have to ask yourself. There are just so many variables. Some people are meant to just do a startup or be in this type of lifestyle. You have to first assess a fit for that. If you really want to do it, like one of the reasons there aren't as many founders is because there's a lot more broke founders. If you're okay with being broke, making less money, with no certainty of a payout in the future, and you go, I would still do this, I think that's a good time. And you're not financially constrained, meaning like quitting your day job isn't going to make you or your family homeless or something like that. Then yeah, now's a good time to go off and build your business. You're going to have an easier time recruiting, and you're going to be one of the fewer entrepreneurs looking for funding and whatnot. It'll still be tough, but if you feel like you're okay with this not being a great financial outcome for you possibly, and you really want to do this, absolutely, now's the right time.
So somebody wrote, what are the books that you currently read or that you would recommend that inspired you?
Oh, I have a whole series of books that I recommend. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, look out for some more videos coming out. I've been so heads down on building Yobi up recently. I haven't posted some. Most definitely this book called Entrepreneurial Leadership. If you already have a company and you're kind of growing and you want to learn more about leadership, Entrepreneurial Leadership by Joel Peterson. It is a wonderful book, but I have an entire list. Feel free to reach out to me directly, over social media or wherever, and I'll give you an entire list. So for all the executives that I work with or that work at one of the companies that I own, like there's this long list of like a couple dozen books that I give them. You should definitely check it out. If you just want a really entertaining book, Shoe Dog, which is the story of Nike, that's a really, really entertaining book if you're into startups.
So the next question is, do you have any advice for undergrads looking to get into building their first startup venture? What are the key qualities to look for when choosing choosing co-founders, and what roles are absolutely necessary for a thriving team? That's a lot.
If you're an undergrad, yeah, actually, that's a really great question. You know, I did not start my startup until, or I didn't go out on my own until a long time after I graduated. I had a whole career as an engineer. I worked at a bunch of startups, and that was great and all, but you know, hindsight being 2020, I wish I'd started a lot sooner. Honestly, I wish I never, I wish I just like right from undergrad, I started my own company and tried doing that. Mainly because if you fail, and you will, and it's okay to fail, right? Failure is not permanent. It's not a permanent state, just like success isn't a permanent state either. So if you fail, there's less repercussion of it. When I started, I had kids, family. Yeah, failure had some pretty serious consequences. So I would recommend starting out earlier rather than later. Plus, you've got more energy. You can just be singularly focused on just building your company and learning and growing, which is what you're going to have to do to be successful. As far as what you want to look for in a co-founder, that one's really hard. That one's really, really hard. I've only ever had one really good co-founder. And unfortunately, he was a very good friend. He got sick early on, so kind of had to go on by myself after that. I would say how you communicate and how you care for the other person is probably the most important thing. And having enough complementarity. So if they're better at certain things than you, things where you're weak, that's probably the best scenario you could have. So I'm okay at selling. I'm okay at engineering, but there's certain things like that I really don't like doing. I really don't like doing accounting, bookkeeping. I don't often cross all the T's and dot the I's. So in a company, it's really important to have someone making up for your shortcomings. So if you know yourself and you know you have this friend that cares about you and that you care about them personally, because you're going to go through failures together, ups and downs together, I would basically look for some complementarity and skill set there. But yeah, communication is huge. If it's somebody that you don't really know well and you just have that complementarity and skill set, you're really tossing a coin and hoping that it works. But when you're at the undergrad phase, to be honest, even if it doesn't work, what's the worst that can happen? Just be upfront with the person if it's somebody that you don't know very well. That you guys are going to figure things out.
So we had a question from the audience: pros and cons of starting a company in the U.S. versus home country for international students. I don't know if that's.
Oh boy, I am not a lawyer, so I have to give you a disclaimer on that. So if you are not a U.S. citizen, the type of company that you can open here, like with LLCs, S corps, I think you're going to face limitations there. Not 100% sure how Delaware C corps work. If you're doing a startup that's going to raise money, like every VC is going to basically make you become a Delaware C corp. So if you're going to raise money in Silicon Valley and you want to build a company, I think the Delaware C corp is the way to go. I really don't have much experience about building companies overseas. But wherever it is that you build a company, I think it makes sense in this globalized world to make use of to basically go for things that are most advantageous to you, and that's best known. I know if you're a European company, they're a lot more rigorous about what you need to be a company that's based in the European Union. So If Delaware C Corp is easier than that, do that. Let me preface that with one other thing. More important than the company structure initially, because you can always reform, even if you were like created somewhere else or built a company somewhere else, you can always reform in the US if you wanted to take funding. I know several Israeli companies that have done that. But the most important thing is to know what you're going to solve. So worry about the technical details later, but make sure you have a real business first. Make sure you're building something that people want first. Once you've validated that, then you can find plenty of lawyers, plenty of advisors who can tell you how to actually turn that into an entity that that'll serve your needs.
So I don't know if you can answer this question, but how do you deal with fighting between startup founders? I mean,
boxing gloves? No. So I'm going to recommend another book. There's this really great book called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Highly recommend it because I am of firm belief that you should fight. Fighting is a great thing. Conflict is a great thing, done right. Conflict, knowing that you have the other person's interest at heart and that you're not just there to put the other person down, that's a great way to grow. I fight with my coworkers all the time. They fight with me, but it's never like putting just out of spite. It's never hateful. It's constructive criticism, right? If somebody says, "Hey, Ahmed, you know, a nameless person has told me that I could be abrasive," except he used the word a-hole and said, "Ahmed, you're a complete a-hole. Like, nobody likes working with you because you act like X, Y, Z," right? And I listened to him, and he was right. I didn't realize that the way I was talking, the way I was expressing my frustrations, my anxieties, made me come off like a completely unappreciative person to my employees. And I'd forgotten the fact that I was talking to my employees who looked up to me, and my disapproval, even if it's not directed at them, that's how it was being interpreted. And because of that fight, because of this person bringing that up to me, I took note of that and I said, "Oh, that's absolutely not what I want." And I knew that this person wasn't just attacking me because they're my friend. They've been my friend for a long time, and they've had my back where it mattered. So if you have a co-founder who's a friend and you guys fight, you have to have some rules about it. It can't be about personal put downs. It can't get too emotional, but it's good. Like when somebody who cares about you is saying something negative, pay attention, listen, right? It's hard to do. It takes a lot of discipline, but pay attention and listen, and then like try to be factual about it. Is it true that, I'm being a complete a-hole? Am I being abrasive? And then you start coming up with some tactics on if they're right. And it's crazy when you have this response where you actually listen to someone who's complaining. They'll feel really bad, especially if they're good people. They'll feel really bad. They'll be like, "Oh, I didn't mean to make you feel bad, but this is just how you come off." And you're going to come out stronger on the other end. You're going to come out better. But if it's personal and if it's just bitterness and just if you can't get to that point where something constructive comes out of the conflict, that's tough. You should try to get to a point where conflicts are constructive, not destructive.
So I think we have time for probably 1 or 2 more questions. If anybody in the audience has questions, feel free to either raise your hand or put them in the chat or the Q&A. Another question that came up was, it kind of, I guess, piggybacks off the last one, but in a more positive way. What are the top criteria for a new business to be successful?
What are the top criteria for a new business to be successful? This is going to sound really, I don't mean to make it sound condescending, but I talked to someone else recently about this too. Businesses are really simple, right? In this way, you make money, you spend some money, and then you have a profit. Every business works like that. Whether it's a real estate agency, whether it's Airbnb, or whether it's Uber. Now, businesses might not make a profit today, might make a profit in the future or whatever, but those fundamentals are always important. So if you're starting a business now, you want it to be successful, you should have a very good grasp of how a business works, right? What are you selling? Because I've seen too many times engineers and other people who are craftsmen, right? People who are very creative. They look at the impact. I'm guilty of this myself, right? They'll look at the impact, they'll look at the coolness, and they'll forget the business part. And when there's not enough money in the bank, I'll be like, oh shoot, why do I not have money in the bank? Because I forgot about the business part. So if you want your business to be successful, think about the finances, think about the numbers early.
So we have a comment from somebody in the audience. It says, you talk a lot about communication. Can you give a few examples? And then also, would you be willing to share your slides with people?
Yes, I'm more than happy to share my slides. So important communication. So communication, and then some more, right? So for example, like you have to be very, very keenly aware that you're dealing with other people, whether they're your customers, whether they're your employees, whether they're your coworkers, co-founders, right? Effective communication is key. Being able to communicate your value proposition to your customers, incredibly important. Understanding what they're hearing is incredibly important. I know I've just done talking for like an hour now, but believe it or not, the big lesson that I've learned is it's all about listening. So whenever the opportunity presents itself to listen, especially if you're someone like me who loves to talk, I love hearing the sound of my voice. So if you find yourself to be like that, listen more, and understand where the other person is trying to come from, and the best that you can. Put yourself in the other person's shoes, and try to get to a good place. Try to get to a good point where it's you're not trying to screw the other person out, or it's not zero sum. And business is almost never ever zero sum. So if you pay attention, listen, and come up with something that resolves a problem, you'll be happier for it in every dimension.
So I think that's all the time we have questions for. It's funny because one of these questions I think could be like, actually you've given this talk already, like what is the future of AI? So maybe we'll have to schedule another talk next quarter. But,
all right.
Thank you, Ahmed, for your time and for providing all this expertise, and just I think it's really great that our students as well as our audience and our guests could hear you talk.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So this concludes our workshop for the day. Thank you, guys. We'll be sending some slides to everybody who registered, as well as just Ahmed's LinkedIn information.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.